Thank you so much, Mene, for that interesting presentation. It's really interesting to hear about how AstraZeneca are increasing the productivity of your pipeline, and how that's kind of tipping you ahead of maybe some of your industry peers. We have a number of questions that have come on from our leaders of tomorrow. So to start off, I wonder whether we can talk about the different drug modalities that you spoke about in the presentation. And someone has asked which drug modality you think will be dominating the field in the near future. Typically, people think small molecules or biologics, but what do you say?
Look, I think they're all going to be important in different ways. I don't think any one modality is going to dominate. Actually, I think it's a little bit not quite the right way of thinking about it. It's what modalities do you think are going to be important for enabling scientists to run research and development programs and tackle programs in terms of pathophysiology. So I think small molecules and monoclonal antibodies and proteins will remain important as they are today. What I think you'll see is an increase in the number of oligonucleotide-based programs. We've already seen more oligonucleotide programs approved already, and there's a lot in development as well. And I think we've got, I think, about 6 or 7 oligonucleotide-based programs now actually in the clinic or about to enter the clinic. So it's a significant increase from where we were. Cell-based therapies, you see companies like Novartis and others making big investments and acquisitions of cell-based therapy companies, CAR-T oncology, but also now regenerative therapies outside of oncology. So I think all these modalities are going to be important. I didn't mention CRISPR, but gene editing is also interesting, and obviously there's a lot of biotechs working in that space. I think the key is to have as many opportunities to be able to prosecute the biology you're most excited about. And I think they're all going to be important in one way or another.
Yeah, it's definitely diversifying.
Yeah.
So on the theme of the new modalities, what regulatory issues do you run into in introducing some of these novel modalities into the clinical space?
They're different depending on the modality, and of course, as there's with less safety data and history behind them, regulators obviously want to understand the safety issues. The approaches we take are very similar, whether it's a new modality or an old modality. You have to show your margins and your understanding of exposure and distribution of the molecule, degradation, metabolism, etc. But obviously, the less experience there is with a particular modality, the more regulators want to see in terms of safety data to make sure that you can continue safely, but also that you understand the modality in terms of how you're controlling exposure to it for the patient that's being studied.
Yeah, moving slightly on to what I imagine you've spoken a lot about recently is COVID. So we've got a question. People are wondering whether currently, obviously, we're seeing the rapid development of a COVID vaccine, and I know that's something that AstraZeneca are heavily involved in. Can we learn from this to accelerate the drug development process that happens under normal circumstances?
So there are things that we're learning about how to move things quickly. So actually, if I look at our antibody program, probably more than the vaccine program, and I look at how quickly we've moved from the concept of targeting SARS-CoV-2 with a monoclonal antibody to actually getting the monoclonal antibody into the clinic, which we've done in about 6 months. Normally it would take about 2 years, 2.5, 3 years. So there are things that we've done that we wouldn't have done before that I think we might do again for certain programs that are of a high priority in terms of how you develop the cell lines, how many things you do in parallel versus series. That I think have been, very interesting, smart, and ambitious. So I think in that regard, I think there are some things that we will do differently. I think what COVID has taught us actually more is what I talked about at the end of my talk in terms of how we're having to engage with patients in a different way and run clinical trials in a different way. So how you are able to get, for example, the drug supplied to the patient's home, how you do remote visits versus clinical trial hospital visits, what digital tools you can use to enable you to study the progress of the patient, whether it's measuring, lung function or glucose or something else. We're starting to be able to do a lot more of these things at the patient's home, which is making the number of visits to a clinical trial site or hospital reduce, which is actually good because it keeps the patient safe at home. It limits their exposure to potential infection. And I think many of those things will start to happen more and more, even when hopefully we return back to normal, because it actually makes the trials less expensive. It makes the impact on the patient's life less onerous, right? So it makes it easier for a patient to participate in a clinical trial. And it means we also start to generate data in real time as well through devices, as opposed to having to wait for someone to come to see a nurse or a physician and get studied, once every few months versus being studied actually in effect in real time during the course of, of their disease and their trial. So I think those things are going to become our new normal more and more as we move forward into 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, you've actually just covered the next question I was going to ask you around virtual clinical trials. So that you see that being applicable.
So they're not virtual trials. They're not virtual trials. The way that we're studying is different, right? So the virtual clinical trial is for me a trial that is done in silico versus in using patients and data.
Okay.
This is how we collect clinical trial data.
Yeah.
It's collecting the data differently and engaging with the patient differently. A virtual trial is more, can you use real world evidence, data that's collected virtually to enable you to understand whether a medicine or a molecule is working or not in the real world. A little bit different. But important as well, but a little bit different.
Yeah. Do you see a future of that sort of clinical trial?
Yeah, it's a different approach and regulators treat them differently. But yes, we can do that. But I think less likely to get an indication for something like that, because ultimately regulators want randomized studies, whether they're done, at home or visiting trial sites.
Yeah. Just looking down the questions, how does AstraZeneca choose which diseases to develop therapeutics for? So we've heard in the previous session this week about the challenge of antimicrobial resistance, but this is something that Big Pharma seems to have divested away from in recent years. Is AstraZeneca doing anything in this space?
No, so we again, I think it's absolutely, so there's been less investment in antimicrobial work over the years, although our companies are getting into it. We actually partnered all of our assets with Pfizer, so Pfizer took our antibacterial pipeline on. Some companies are in the space, some less so. The way that we choose, and I think the way companies choose what areas they're in is they determine which areas they can be globally competitive and have the technical expertise and knowledge to be able to continue to advance research and development in that area and do it in a globally competitive way. What I would say is historically, and I'm talking now about 2010, 2011, when I first joined, we were very thinly spread across many therapy areas. We decided to focus in the cardiovascular, metabolic, renal, respiratory, immunology, and oncology space, because those were the areas where we thought we could globally compete and be good at, be not just doing it, but doing it well. And that focus, I think, is what enables you to go deeper into areas and continue to advance the research, the understanding of the pathophysiology, and hopefully bring innovative programs forwards, because you understand not just the biology, but the patient population, the reimbursement environment, and how to run studies effectively and quickly. If you spread yourself too thin, you do lots of things badly or okay versus doing a few things really well. I think that's true in life of many things. So for us, those are our areas of focus. I do have two small groups that work in the antimicrobial space and the neuroscience space. I run them like biotechs within the R&D group. So they're around 20, 30 people. They're very focused. They tend to partner the areas they work in. But actually, by having that area of expertise, it's enabled us, for example, to move on COVID very quickly, because I quickly pivoted my antimicrobial group from what they were working on, next generation flu vaccines, to COVID. And they were able to move very quickly and successfully, hopefully, as well. So that's how we do it. But ultimately, our focus is those three core areas. That's where I would say 85% of our resources and budget are deployed. And the other areas we dabble in, but then turn to area of companies that have it as their core. So in neuroscience, for example, we have some very exciting programs. When we had our Alzheimer's programs, we partnered them with Lilly at the time because they were focused on Alzheimer's disease. Or Takeda, we have a synuclein program in Parkinson's disease because Takeda are focused on PD. And so that's an area they have expertise on. So by working with them, we use their strength to move programs that we've developed in our laboratories.
Yeah, collaboration is something that's come out as a theme in a lot of our sessions this week. And I think AstraZeneca and what you said is a perfect example of that.
We collaborate with everyone. When we collaborate with people, it can strengthen our understanding, our ability to get, turn science into a medicine.
Yeah. You mentioned then about the reimbursement of drugs and the knowledge of the reimbursement within the areas that AstraZeneca works on. How does the reimbursement of new modalities such as cell therapies differ from the traditional small molecules and biologics? Is there a difference there?
No, it doesn't change. The reimbursement and the value is something based on the evidence that you can generate during your clinical development program to show why you're meeting an unmet medical need and why the medicine is good value for money. And it doesn't matter whether it's a cell therapy, an oligonucleotide, or a small molecule, the value you demonstrate has to be clear for it to be reimbursed, whether it's reimbursed in the United States, Europe, or anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I think we've got maybe time for 2 more quick questions. So even with the integration of AI and machine learning and digital health solutions, what challenges remain for the pharmaceutical industry at different stages of drug development? Are there still some key gaps there?
Oh, well, the challenges are huge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that we've got ourselves to success rates of 20%. The industry, as you saw, is still hovering at around 5 to 6%. Just to make that clear, that means that we fail as an industry 95% of the time with our programs. And I'm only talking about when you've nominated a candidate to launch, not research. If you had research, the success rates are even worse. So we're very good at failing. So, do we have areas to improve? Of course we do. So my challenge in AZ is to make sure we keep ourselves above 20%, hopefully get to 25%, 30% success rates. But as an industry, we have to improve our attrition. It's unsustainable as an industry to be failing 95% of the time. You were making cars or phones and failing that often, you wouldn't be in business for very long. So, I think understanding disease pathophysiology, understanding, picking the right pathways and targets to work on, and then prosecuting those cost effectively through development it remains a huge, huge challenge for our industry as a whole.
Yeah. And then maybe just to close, we're obviously joined here today by a range of early career scientists from completely different backgrounds. What would your advice be for budding scientists in choosing what area to focus on? So how would you choose between pursuing the pressing global challenges over personal passions or hype areas? And where's the balance there?
Yeah, I would get engaged in stuff that you're passionate and excited about. Make sure you love what you're doing. If you don't love what you're doing, you're not doing the right thing. And take risks. Don't be afraid to take risks and challenges. If I look at my career, and how I've moved through my career, it's taking relatively big risks where you feel very uncomfortable about what you're going to be doing, which is great, and then finding out that you can actually do it after you've made the decision to try it, and then just making sure that whatever it is that you're doing, you love doing it, because we spend most of our waking life working. If you don't enjoy it, right, you should be doing something else, because that I think is what gets you out of bed early and gets you back to bed late, but also keeps you energized, motivated, and excited about getting up the next day and doing it again.
Yeah,
so take
definitely.
risks, enjoy what you do, and just make sure you continue to enjoy it and be energized by it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I know our leaders of tomorrow were very excited for this session.
It's my pleasure, and hopefully next year we can all be face to face again. Fingers crossed for the vaccines
hopefully.
and the antibodies.
Yeah, keep working hard, AstraZeneca.
That's right. I'll get back to it right now.
So we're going into a 15-minute break now. I just like to take this opportunity once again to thank Mene for coming to join us, and to remind our teams that are pitching at the Voices of Tomorrow competition next, if you can take this break to join the call so that we can get you ready for your pitches.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Robert. And keep well, everybody. See you next year.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mene.
Take care.